Elara stood at the crest of a gently sloping hill, gazing down at a landscape steeped in moonlit shadows. The path before her was abandoned by most travelers, for it led to a place whispered of only in dimly lit taverns and secluded family gatherings, the Valley of the Cursed Orchard. Her cloak fluttered around her ankles in the night wind. Twice already she had considered turning back. The stories of the orchard and its midnight blooms filled every corner of her childhood with nightmares, but also a strange curiosity that had never left her. Now, after years of living with this inexplicable pull, she had come to see the orchard for herself. She told no one of this journey. Her neighbors would have called her foolish, her parents would have tried to dissuade her, and her parents might have even locked her in her chambers to preserve her safety. Deep in the valley, entwined by gnarled trees long condemned, shimmered the faint glow of mysterious blossoms that had once been more revered than the muses themselves. Their petals were said to be as pale as lunar light, their fragrance wafting with a night air that bore both the promise of enchantment and the threat of doom. Elara remembered tales of these flowers, ephemeral blossoms that only appeared under the darkest hours of an eclipse, shimmering like trapped starlight, only to vanish at the first hint of dawn. The orchard that housed them had been the pride of a forgotten king, Ionides the Wanderer, who wished to offer the most splendid gift to the gods. But his arrogance had led him astray. It was said that Ionides had desired to replicate the domain of Selene, the goddess of the moon, on mortal soil, and for a time he succeeded. He erected graceful colonnades all around the orchard so that visitors might feel as if they walked among heavenly columns under ancient starlit skies. The orchard, at its zenith, was a place of unmatched serenity, where travelers from distant lands came to admire its flourishing blooms. It was also whispered that the orchard produced ambrosia like nectar, so potent that a single drop could lull an entire city to tranquil peace. Unsurprisingly, Ionides grew boastful. He was convinced that his creation had charmed the pantheon and elevated him above mortal constraints. But gods and goddesses do not tolerate presumption kindly. On a night when the moon curved like a sliver of scythe across the blackness, Ionides raised a cup of nectar to the skies, proclaiming himself the equal of divine beings. Angered by his hubris, Selene cursed the orchard. Never again would these blossoms greet the sun's rays in humble brilliance. Instead, they would bloom only under the rare midnight eclipse, evanescent as dreams, a secret for the cursed orchard alone. All mortal eyes that witnessed them were promised only sorrow and longing, for to see the blooms was to desperately yearn for them until the ends of one's days, unable to rest until they held them. But if any dared to pick even a single bloom, their own lifeblood would be drained by the orchard's roots. Generations passed. Ionides disappeared in disgrace, his orchard consumed by the creeping hush of drifting moonlight. Few ventured near the place, and all who did spoke of a haunting presence, a hush of ghosts among trees, and fleeting shadows in the corner of one's vision. Yet legends persisted that within those wavering petals lay the power to break curses, heal mortal wounds, or bring lost souls back to the realm of the living. Whether such powers were real or simply rumor, people were too afraid to find out. Some who tried never returned. Elara was different. She had grown up on these tales, enraptured by the orchard's mystery. As a child, she was bedridden by a strange fever, and her grandmother would soothe her at night by telling her stories of the orchard, wonderful anecdotes from a time before Ionides' corruption, when the orchard was a testament to the gods' benevolence. She would speak of its blossoms, glowing with pure devotion, of the sweet, healing fragrance that could quell all pain. Those stories had lingered in Elara's heart for so long that when she finally regained strength, she pledged that one day she would find a way to restore the orchard's former glory. She drew a deep breath and began her descent. With every step, the moonlight seemed to fade, replaced by the starless dark that reminded her of being underwater. The orchard's twisted fence posts materialized out of the gloom, battered by centuries of neglect. Gently placing her hand on one of the posts, Ilara noticed how cold the wood felt beneath her fingertips, far colder than the night air should allow. Pushing through a half-broken gate, she entered the orchard, heart thumping loudly in her chest. Immediately the hush engulfed her. It was as if the wind dared not blow here. Not a single leaf rustled, and the orchard felt drained of sound. She could still see faint flickers of blossoms far within, but they teased her eyes, appearing like wraiths that vanished whenever she looked directly at them. The orchard's trees stood stark and rigid, their bark cracked with deep fissures. Some of those fissures seemed to glow faintly, a ghost-like shimmer that made her hair stand on end. The ground was littered with withered petals of the ancient blooms, signs of past eclipses, little ghosts themselves. She had come prepared with a plan. During her journey here, Ilara stopped at a sacred temple of Hecate, the goddess associated with magic and pathways. From that temple, she procured a clay amulet engraved with protective symbols. The priestess there had warned her firmly. "Take this, child, if your heart is set upon that orchard," she said. "It will shield you from despair, but it cannot challenge a god's curse on its own. Stay vigilant." If Ilara's quest succeeded, the orchard's blossoms might be used to heal her ailing friend Danae, whose heart was slowly failing. Ilara believed the orchard's flowers, fabled for a potent, moon-given magic, were her friend's only hope. Step by step, she made her way deeper into the orchard, guided by thin, silvery moonlight trickling through decaying canopies. She couldn't shake a strange sensation, as though unseen eyes were tracking her every move. Once or twice she caught a glimpse of a figure among the trees, a pale glow, a swirl of a robe. But when she turned to look, there was only a trunk or a knotted branch. She pressed the amulet around her neck, chanting silent prayers to Hecate for protection. The orchard was waiting, it seemed, for the moment of eclipse. The knowledge made her blood sing with a blend of dread and anticipation. At last she found a clearing where a broken marble altar stood, weathered inscriptions curled along its edges, possibly verses praising Selene from Ionides' time. Beneath the cracked surface, watery reflections of moonlight swirled, hinting at a hidden pool, half buried by soil and dead leaves. Ilara knelt and brushed debris from the inscription, managing to decipher some words. "O gracious goddess of the night, the silver-limbed queen, bestow upon us your eternal bloom." She paused to consider the arrogance behind Ionides' request, as well as the orchard's potent sadness. Even now, she felt a pang of sympathy for a mortal who had dared to wrest divine power from the cosmos and found the consequences insurmountable. From the corner of her eye she spied movement, an old man in tattered garments, leaning on a twisted staff. She leapt to her feet, her heart pounding. He regarded her with eyes clouded by age or perhaps by the orchard's ethereal gloom. His voice came in a whisper, almost inaudible. "You have chosen a terrible night for a stroll, child." "Who are you?" Ilara asked, summoning what courage she could. He gave a thin smile. "No one of importance, merely a wanderer. But you have a name, do you not? And a purpose, that much is certain." Ilara hesitated, but there was a gentleness in his question. "My name is Ilara," she said. "I've come here to see the flowers. I need their power. My friend is dying." The old man tilted his head as though listening to the orchard's silent lament. At length he said, "Those who seek the orchard's power seldom leave unscathed. It offers wonders beyond mortal imagination. But they come at a price. The moon's curse is not so easily broken." She pressed a hand against the protective amulet. "I'm willing to take that chance. I have to try." "Oipoid serum," exclaimed Ys. "Near. Ala, boy. Boyata. The eclipse is near. I feel that the clock is on it, and returned it in a distorted hush. When the moon is consumed by the earth's shadow, the blooms will awaken in full. But keep your guard, for the orchard can twist illusions from your memories. You may see faces of those you've lost, or hear voices of those you love. Desperation will lead you astray. Elara nodded, steeling herself. For a flicker of a moment, she wondered if she should trust this man. But the orchard was not a place where one could bluff. She bowed her head slightly to him. I'll remember your warning. Then she ventured onward, following the swirling sense of power that seemed to emanate from the orchard's deepest point. The old man's staff taps receded behind her, leaving her alone in the labyrinth of trees. The hush was now thick enough to feel like a tangible presence, clinging to her limbs. Overhead, the moon grew heavier in the sky, drifting behind a veil of cloud. Elara sensed the eclipse was close. She pushed through drooping branches and brambles that tugged at her cloak, all the while feeling the orchard's aura intensify. At last, she reached a wide clearing. The trees formed a natural ring, twisted trunks creating a circle of runic silhouettes. In the center lay an ancient well of carved stone. Runes spiraled around its perimeter. Each symbol was linked to lunar phases and pleas to unknown powers. As Elara approached, she found the entire area awash in a soft, ghostly glow. It seemed as if the orchard was breathing. The wind whispered in a low moan, and overhead the moon began to fade, devoured by the earth's shadow, plunging the clearing into an otherworldly twilight. One by one, blossoms unfurled among the gnarled branches. Delicate petals, milky white with faint slivers of silver at their tips, shimmered like tiny mirrors reflecting ephemeral starlight. An aroma, sweeter than anything she had ever known, wove through the hush, teasing her senses. Elara felt tears prickling her eyes, tears of awe, of sorrow, of longing. The orchard's cursed splendor was unmatched. In these brief moments it seemed the orchard lived again, an echo of its ancient majesty. Her body tensed as she approached the largest tree by the well. Its trunk was thick and ancient, etched with lines that seemed to depict a history of pain, betrayal, and regret. A swirl of shimmering petals wafted from its branches, swirling around her like snowfall. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She caught sight of a single bloom opening just within reach. Its petals gleamed a pale luminescence. She found herself drawn forward as though in a trance. Suddenly, an image flickered in the corner of her vision. Danae, smiling in that brave but resigned way she often did from her sickbed. Elara froze. The orchard was conjuring illusions? Or was it simply kindling memories from her own mind? A jolt of determination surged through her. If there was any chance this flower could help Danae, she had to seize it. Turning her face away from the vision, Elara raised a trembling hand toward the bloom. She could almost hear her own heartbeat, counting off the seconds until dawn. A voice echoed from the shadowy well. "Desist," it pleaded, faint and fading. "The orchard exacts a toll. Even the goddess-chosen cannot escape it." Elara ignored the voice, unstoppable in her purpose. Her fingertips grazed the petals, so soft they felt like mist. A sweet coolness coursed into her hand. Then she recalled the warning. Picking a bloom might drain her lifeblood, but perhaps there was another way. She pulled a tiny silver dagger from her belt and a small stasis jar from her pouch. If she cut the stem carefully, perhaps the orchard wouldn't claim her as sacrifice. Yet in her other hand, the amulet from Hecate pulsated, as though trying to tug her back from the brink of a devastating choice. For an agonizing moment, Elara hesitated. She pressed the amulet to her chest in a silent plea for guidance. Just then, The orchard erupted in a phantom wind. The trees rustled with voices like an angry, whispered crowd. Branches stretched and groaned. Petals spiraled in a frenzy around the clearing. She looked skyward. The moon was completely obscured in eclipse, the midday darkness in the middle of the night. The orchard thrummed with an almost sentient energy, as if Ioannidis's trespass lived on, always seeking new souls to devour. "Elara!" a gentle tone called, and she turned to see Danae standing behind her, eyes shining with gratitude. Elara's heart twisted. She knew it was a trick, yet part of her longed for that comforting vision. Seeing Danae, healthy and luminous, overcame her rational senses. If the orchard wanted to show her illusions, it had succeeded in choosing the most compelling. The figure stepped closer. "Don't leave me," the illusion said. "Save me." With a fresh wave of determination, Elara tightened her jaw. She turned back to the bloom, lifted the dagger, and pressed its tip to the flower's slender stem. As she sliced, a shriek tore through the orchard, a cry that sounded like the despair of 1,000 restless spirits. The blossom fell into her hand, and she quickly tucked it into the stasis jar, sealing it carefully. The next instant, jagged roots burst from the ground, twisting around her ankles. She stumbled, dropping the dagger. The orchard was alive with fury, roused by her bold theft. She felt a chill travelling up her legs, as though the orchard was draining her warmth. She clutched the amulet, whispering a desperate incantation she had learned from the priestess of Hecate. The symbols on the amulet began to glow, forming a shimmering barrier that halted the roots from creeping further up her body. Still, the orchard's vengeance was not easily pacified. More roots snapped forward. Each second that passed, Elara felt her energy wane, as if something cold was being forced into her blood. "No," she gasped, continuing the chant. Her voice wavered, but she pushed on, mustering every ounce of faith in the goddess's power. At last, in a final surge, the roots recoiled, releasing her ankles. She scrambled to her feet, half-dazed, and staggered away from the well. Yet the orchard's illusions persisted. She saw phantoms swirling in the spaces between trees, Ionides robed in cobalt silk, kneeling before majestic Selene. The goddess turned away, her luminous face filled with scorn. The vision dissolved into another scene. Ionides wandering alone among the orchard's once glorious blossoms, weeping for his lost grace. He pounded his fists against the earth, cursing the gods who had so swiftly stripped him of honor. The orchard's gloom enveloped him, and in one echoing heartbeat, 1,000 withered flowers fell around him like silent tears. Elara clutched the jar. If she could escape the orchard while the eclipse still shielded the flowers from the sun, she might hold on to the blossom's power. Her eyes flicked to the sky. Through drifting clouds, the moon's pale sliver of light was gradually emerging. The eclipse would end soon, and all would fade. She started running, ignoring the cuts and bruises on her arms and legs from the orchard's violent retribution. The ground felt thick, as if trying to drag her back into the orchard's sorrowful thrall. Trees groaned around her, ancient limbs swatting at her fleeing form. Yet somehow, guided by the faltering moonlight, she pressed forward until she reached the orchard's edge. The battered gate, still half open, invited her return to the mortal world. With a final burst of will, she slipped through the gate and collapsed on the other side. The orchard's looming presence behind her. Only in that moment did she realize she was gasping for breath, trembling from head to toe. Cradling the stasis jar, she rolled onto her back to gaze at the sky. The moon emerged from its eclipse, slender beams transitioning the night into a more familiar, gentle darkness. She felt a whisper at her ear, and though no one stood beside her, she recognized the old man's voice. "You've stolen from the orchard. Now it is in your blood. Remember, Elara, curses are not always undone simply by crossing a threshold." Her vision blurred and she let herself slip into a restless sleep, jars clutched close. In her dreams, she wandered a realm of twisted trees and sorrowful wails. But Hecate's amulet still glowed, guiding her like a torch in the deep. When she finally awoke, the horizon was tinted with the pale glow of dawn. She rose shakily, Glancing behind her, the orchard was silent once more, stubbornly defiant under the rising sun, a gate to a different world. Summoning one last thread of courage, she resumed her journey back to the village. The roads were long and lonely, but the stasis jar remained intact, the flower within still glowing softly. She believed it was a shimmer of hope, something capable of granting Danae a chance at recovery. At the crest of the final hill before reaching home, she paused, her mind filled with images that needed no orchard illusions to conjure. Danae's once bright laughter, the hush in the house as healers came and went, the heartbreaking day her friend looked at her with eyes dull from pain and pleaded with her to find a way. Elara closed her eyes. She had done what was necessary, despite the orchard's terrors. She had done what was necessary. Despite the orchard's terrors, she only prayed that the price would not be too steep. Later that morning, she arrived at a secluded healing cabin where the village's wise woman, Myrene, was waiting with potions and poultices. Her eyes widened at the sight of Elara's battered frame. "Goddess's mercy, child, what have you done?" Elara carefully presented the stasis jar. "I brought a blossom from the cursed orchard." Myrene pulled back instinctively. "We must try," Elara pleaded. "It might be the only remedy strong enough to save Danae. She can't last much longer." The wise woman stared at the jar, clearly torn. Then she set her jaw. "We shall see what can be done." Together, they placed Danae on a bed of fragrant herbs, aligning the stasis jar in the moonlit window. Myrene carefully prepared a draught, steeping the blossom's petals in a silver basin, adding drops of blessed water. Each swirl of the solution shimmered as though capturing faint moonbeams. Elara's breath caught at the shimmering potential, the orchard's magic harnessed in gentler form. They administered the potion to Danae drop by drop. At first there was no change. Elara's heart sank. Fear of failure and the orchard's vengeful curse mingled in her chest like a rising storm. A full day passed, then another. Myrene made Elara rest, though her dreams were plagued by orchard nightmares. On the morning of the third day, Elara awoke to Myrene's urgent call. "She's stirring." Rushing to Danae's side, Elara watched in wonder. Colour had returned to her friend's cheeks, and she opened her eyes with a spark of life Elara had long forgotten. Danae sat up, though weak, and managed a faint smile. "What did you do?" she whispered, sounding amazed. Myrene felt tears brim in her eyes. Desperate gamble, but one that worked. She cradled Danae's hand in her own. In that moment, relief and gratitude permeated the room like a blessing. Myrene murmured prayers of thanks, though her gaze occasionally flicked to Elara, as though searching for signs of the orchard's ill effects. Time passed. Danae's health improved steadily, bolstered by Myrene's continued ministrations. Yet in the weeks that followed, Elara discovered a new unease stirring within her. At night, she would wake from painful dreams. She saw Ionides kneeling in the orchard's gloom, alone with his regrets. She felt waves of guilt gnawing at her. Or perhaps it was the orchard's lingering presence. Insomnia haunted her, and even by day her reflection in the mirror seemed paler, as though an elusive phosphorescence clung to her skin. She would inhale a breath of fresh air, only to catch the faint sweetness of the orchard's blossoms, despite being miles away. As Danae grew stronger, Elara grew quieter. The memory of that orchard lingered in her thoughts like a fresh bruise. Sometimes she could almost sense the orchard calling to her, whispering of the stolen bloom, urging her back to the cursed valley. She wondered if her life had become irrevocably intertwined with Ionides' folly. Each day she questioned whether a sacrifice might still be demanded. One twilight, as Elara stood by the window watching silver raindrops tap the panes, Danae emerged with a concerned expression. "You look haunted," she said softly. "Whatever burden you carry, let me help." Elara turned, tears catching the fading light. "You've just recovered. I can't burden you with this." But Danae reached for her hands, steady and reassuring. "You risked everything for me," Danae said. Let's find a way to break this hold on you." Ilara's shoulders sagged, relief and dread mingling. And so they decided to seek help from the Temple of Hecate once more. The priestess listened gravely to their tale. "A stolen flower from the orchard during an eclipse will bind the orchard's essence to your soul," she said, reciting from age-worn texts. "But there may be a chance to pacify it. You must return an offering, something precious, under the next midnight eclipse, to restore balance." Determined to free herself from the orchard's shadow, Ilara prepared an offering. She chose a golden locket containing a lock of her own hair and a drop of Danae's tears, symbols of love, sacrifice, and life. A month later, another eclipse was due, and Ilara steeled herself for the journey back. This time, she wasn't alone. Danae, though still delicate, insisted on accompanying her. They arrived at the orchard as the moon began its slow fade behind the earth's shadow. Though tension wreathed Ilara's heart, she felt a different energy now. The orchard no longer felt like a place of endless condemnation. Perhaps something had shifted in the cosmic equilibrium because the stolen bloom had been used to save a life rather than to rob one. The gates groaned open and they stepped inside. The orchard's hush undulated around them, but the terror was less oppressive. The cursed trees began to open their ghostly petals in the darkness, dripping moonlit dew. Together they approached the ancient well where Ilara had once stolen the flower. The ground trembled beneath their feet, as if remembering her trespass. She lifted the small golden locket, reciting words of gratitude. For the orchard, for the goddess, for Danae's renewed life. "Take this as a sign of atonement, and let your curse be eased," she whispered. Then she dropped the locket into the well, where it sank, leaving a faint halo of light behind. Nothing happened at first, only stillness. Then the orchard seemed to sigh, a wave of silent respite passing through the trees. The blossoms glowed with gentle acceptance, and for a brief moment, Ilara felt Ionides' presence. She glimpsed him standing at the periphery, watching from behind a trunk, tears lining his face. He spoke no words, but gave her a faint nod of gratitude. Perhaps in some mysterious passage of fate, he too found a shred of peace in this offering. In time, the orchard's glow returned to darkness. With the moon re-emerging, the blossoms began to close. But Ilara sensed a subtle change. The orchard's hostility had waned, replaced by something like weary resignation. She and Danae turned to leave, walking arm in arm back toward the broken gate under the thinning clouds. Though the orchard remained cursed in part, it no longer possessed her with the same ferocity. That night they made camp on a nearby hill. As dawn approached, Ilara felt an unaccustomed calm settle over her. Perhaps she still carried the orchard's secret hush in her veins, a reminder that some boundaries should not be crossed. Yet she also held the memory of how a single flower saved a life. With a new day, she hoped that someday, be it years or centuries hence, this orchard of ephemeral blooms might fully reconcile with the goddess's disfavor and regain a measure of its former grace. And so, they travelled home. Danae's health improved daily, and Ilara found that the orchard's nocturnal pull no longer invaded her dreams with quite the same intensity. Now it was more like a distant echo, a call that might always linger in her bones but no longer threatened to consume her. The orchard, with its blossoms that only bloomed under a midnight eclipse, remained a lesson in humility, and the boundaries between mortals and gods. Though the curse would likely endure for many generations, she believed there was hope that one day the orchard's sorrow would be lifted by a mortal heart brave enough and humble enough to kneel under its branches by moonlight and ask, not for power or fame, but for forgiveness. As Ilara and Danae watched the sunrise from their village, they shared a simple belief that even a place as haunted as that orchard could hold the seeds of redemption, and perhaps, in the hush that followed Ionides' ancient mistakes, new petals of compassion and understanding would one day unfold, free from the shadows of curses long past.